How's everybody doing? Happy New Year. We are so glad that you're here. And, last week I led worship with my kids. That was so much fun. Pastor George taught a great message. But I am glad to be back doing what I was born to do, which is to teach the Bible and preach the gospel. And I'm glad that you're here starting the year off right. That's the way to do it. So we are really glad that you're here. So let me start. It was December 23rd, 1995. That's the day that I asked my wife to marry me. It was a little over 29 years ago. And thank you. And now, it wasn't the best proposal in the world, I'll be honest. I wasn't really sure how to do it. I was in college at the time. I was getting my undergrad in theology. And I had this class, and I'm pretty sure it was a class in the book of Acts. But I do remember it was a Tuesday night class, and there was this guy in the class whose name was also Bob. So he will be referred to as the other Bob for the rest of the story. Now, as the thing that the other Bob does is that he takes me aside before class, and he says, hey, Bob, check this out. And he takes out a ring, and he shows it to me, and I'm like, hey, man, I appreciate that, but I'm already dating someone. And he says, no, I'm going to ask my girlfriend to marry me. And I said, wow, Bob, you've only been dating this girl for 6 weeks. And he's like, no, but I know she's the one. And being the born encourager that I am, and I'm like, dude, mark my words, this will not end well. And so, which by the way, it did not. And so that's the end of the story of the other Bob. But now, the point is that the other Bob has got me thinking. Because I was sitting there in class, I was finding it hard to concentrate because I'm sitting there thinking, I've been dating Carrie for almost 3 years. Like, what am I waiting for to ask her to marry me? And I thought, I don't know, there was a part of me that I guess thought like something monumental had to happen to know that it was the right time. But once I saw that the other Bob bought a ring, I thought, they'll sell these to almost anyone. And so I'm like, I just got to just do it. So anyway. I was a delivery guy at night, so I go to school during the day, but I didn't have school every day. So I took a second job doing construction during the day when I didn't have class, so that I could save up enough money to buy her the ring. So I did that for a few months, and so I got her this ring. It wasn't great, but it was the best I could do at the time. The other thing is the way I proposed really wasn't great. So a friend of mine almost spilled the beans that I was going to ask. And so I had, time was of the essence. And, you want there to be when you propose, it's like shock and awe. That's what you're really going for. And so I'm like, if I'm going to do it, I got to do it now. So I had the ring, and I went to my wife's house. And I got like 3 steps inside the door. And I got on one knee, and I asked her to marry me. And so she was not thrilled. She did not like the home that she grew up in. Neither did I, but anyway. And so she was not a big fan of her home, not a big fan of her family, let's be honest. And she's like, that's not what she wanted, was to be proposed to in her home in front of her parents and whatever. And so, and that's why when I asked her to marry me, she didn't say anything. And there was like no response. And, you kind of, when you ask a girl to marry you, you're kind of putting yourself out there. And you're just like, hey, will you marry me? And then there's like radio silence. And, she's thinking through the Rolodex, like, who else is still available here? And so anyway, and then you say the words that every boy longs to say, which is, yeah, I'm going to need an answer. And she's like, yeah, okay. And that was the answer. And I'm like, all right, I'll take it. And so anyway, so that was kind of that. And so I tell you that because when we celebrated our 25th anniversary about 3 years ago, I was going to correct my mistakes. Oh, thank you. Yeah, we're celebrating 28 years in a few weeks. So that's kind of where we're headed. So yeah. So anyway, so when we were celebrating 25, I'm going to correct my mistakes. I'm going to give her a story that's worth telling. And that was really my goal. So I booked this hotel in Naples for a couple of days. I got babysitting for the kids. And we get this this hotel on the beach because I've got something to prove. And so I had this ring that I was going to give her on our 25th anniversary that was like way nicer than the ring that I gave her when I first proposed to her. And so a friend and I designed it. I have a friend who's a jeweler in North Carolina. I called him and he made the ring for me. And so the reason I booked that hotel was because the restaurant at that hotel was voted the most romantic restaurant in Naples. And if you can't trust strangers on the internet, I mean, who can you trust? And so anyway, based on strangers on the internet, that was the best. So anyway, so we get down there. I'll grab that in a minute. I ordered a pizza. And so anyway, so we get there. So I go down there the day before. I tell my wife I'm going for a walk. I go downstairs, but I really go to the restaurant. And so I talk to the manager, tell her what the plan is. She's like, well, let's pick out the table that you're going to sit at. We pick out the table. She tells the wait staff, hey, this is what he's doing. This is a big night, 25th. Anyway, all of that. So we're all set. And then, so the day comes, we go downstairs to where we're going to have dinner. And we sit at this really nice table right by the beach. And the challenge is that it's raining. And my plan was after we had dinner that we were going to walk out onto the beach and I was going to get down on one knee and I was going to ask her. And so the problem is now it's pouring rain. And so I'm like, hey, I'm so sorry. It's raining. We were going to walk out on the beach. She's like, Bob, don't worry about it. This trip has been perfect. And it definitely makes up for when you proposed to me in my parents' house. And so anyway, and I'm like, well, speaking of that. And then I got up out of my chair, I grabbed the ring out of my jacket, and I get down on one knee, and I say, Carrie, I love you with all my heart. Will you marry me for another 25 years? And my heart was beating out of my chest. And by the way, not like she's going to say no. Like I'm pretty sure I had this locked in. But anyway, I'm so nervous because I just want her to have a good story to tell in this whole thing. And so anyway, I open the box. And she sees the ring and she gasps, which, by the way, that's a good sign. And then she says, well, yes, immediately. No delay this time. She says, yes, absolutely. That's even better. And then the last thing, she's like, is that diamond real? And that was the ringer. That's how we knew. And I'm like, yes, it's real. And I think it costs more than my car, so don't lose it. And so now, here's why I tell you all of that is because, I've been a pastor for, goodness, more than 25 years now. And I have done so much premarital counseling in my life. No couple has ever told me that they're winging it when it comes to their ceremony. Instead, what I hear when I sit with a couple and I say, hey, tell me about your ceremony, it is the most detailed and choreographed event in the history of mankind. And by the way, and they haven't just decided like what's going to happen, but I mean, everybody picks out everything. You picked out the venue. You picked out the spot at the venue. You picked out all the food. You tasted 15 different types of cake to find out what flavor tastes like our love. Like, this is good, but that's not our love. Let's try that. That's our love. Yeah, anyway, so you just do that. And then you didn't just pick out your own clothes. No, you picked out your own clothes, and then you picked out the clothes for you and all your friends. Isn't that just because you look at these bridesmaid dresses, like no one chose to dress themselves in that way. And it's a test of friendship is what it is. It's like, I love you so much. Do you really? You're going to wear this fuchsia dress that's ill-fitting, and we're going to find out if you love me or not. And they do, because that's what we do. And so, by the way, the average amount that's spent on weddings is $28,000. That is the average that's spent in America. And my wedding, I can tell you how much it cost. It cost $1,500, and that included the reception. And was it good? Horrible. Total disaster. And it really was a mess because so we didn't have any money for food. So we decided that we were going to have the wedding early at 10 a.m. so that everything is done by 11. We were going to do a brief reception with just cake and coffee at 11, and we were going to send everybody packing by noon to go get food on their own. That was the plan. So, except for the fact that at 10:45 on the day of my wedding, I'm standing at the altar with Jason, who is my best man, and I'm standing there waiting, and my wife isn't there. And so, I'm there at 10. At 10:45, I look, the doors are open, and I see in the hall at church, I see my wife running like a gazelle with a T-shirt and a pair of shorts running through the hall with her gown in one hand. I mean, she's just really going for it. And I'm like, okay, so that didn't happen. So anyway, by the time she got ready, by the time the service started, by the time it ended, and we started the reception, it was 1 p.m., and everyone was hungry. And we had no food. We didn't even have the rice that you throw. Like I said, no food. No food. And so, not even raw food. We had no food. And so then, we had cake and coffee. We didn't even think, like maybe some people would like water. Didn't even think about it. We didn't have it. So anyway, that was a mess. But you know what? I'm as married as everybody else in the room. So that it still works. Now, here's why. I'm telling you this because this is one of the things that we do. And we do this in marriage, and we do this with a lot of things, that we have this tendency to focus on the start, but not on the finish. And I truly believe that if we would focus on the finish as much as we focused on the start, we'd see a lot less couples dropping off in the middle. Now, before you say, like, well, I'm not married, so this message isn't even for me, the reality is 94% of people get married. So it's going to apply to you soon enough. So I want you to listen. And if you say, well, yeah, I'm married, but things are tough. And it's like, that's okay. If things are tough, then this message definitely is for you. Because listen, if everything in your life is horrible right now, if everything is difficult, but your marriage is good, things are looking up. You know why? Because your marriage is the relational foundation of your life. But you can have all the success in the world. And if your marriage is in shambles, then whatever success you might attain, it feels like it's turning to ashes in your hands. We've been working our way through the book of Exodus. We've made it to Exodus 20, what we call the 10 Commandments, or the ancient Hebrews called the 10 Words. We're in message, I think, number 21 in our series. And we've come to commandment number 7. The last time we were in Exodus, I covered 4 words. And I'm pleased to report today we're going to do better than that. We're going to cover 5 words. And then we're going to move a little forward. But here's the point. The command is given in the negative so that we clearly understand God's intention. And so we'll start. It's in Exodus chapter 20 in verse 14. It says, you shall not commit adultery. Now, the reason that the command is given in the negative is so that people would do the positive, so that they would never experience the negative of the command, that couples would love each other and be faithful to each other, so that this would never become an issue. In fact, in more poetic terms, King Solomon in Proverbs would say this way, a loving doe, a graceful deer, may her breast satisfy you always, and may you be ever captivated by her love. Why be captivated, my son, by an adulteress? Why embrace the bosom of another man's wife? For a man's ways are in full view of the Lord, and he examines all his paths. Listen, most people believe it couldn't happen to them. So what happens is, because we don't believe it could happen to us, we make decisions that leave us vulnerable to walking into what destroys relationships. So we're going to look at this happen. Like, we're going to watch how somebody walks into this. But before we do, I want to answer the question, like, why does adultery happen? Now, there's obviously many reasons, but I'm going to give you what I believe to be the top 3 reasons as to why adultery happens. Number 1 is this, is because there are unfulfilled needs. There are unfulfilled needs, and it's just how it is. And men and women have needs, and most of those needs are different. And that's part of the challenge. When Willard Harley wrote his book several years ago now, His Needs, Her Needs, he outlined, based on his research and based on counseling, what men are looking for, what women are looking for. Let me give you the top things that women were looking for in marriage. Number 1, conversation. Number 2, honesty. Number 3, openness. Number 4, financial security. Number 5, family commitment. For men, here's what men were looking for. Number 1, sex. Number 2, companionship. Number 3, an attractive spouse. Number 4, domestic support. Number 5, admiration. You see what the problem is there? None of these things are the same. And so then this is where the problem comes, because now one person is saying, well, these are my needs, so that must be what your needs are. And because we don't understand what our needs are, we just impose, well, what I want is probably what you want. And when that isn't what they want, now conflict happens. And it reminds me of the wife who got home, and her husband was waiting for her at the door, and he hands her 2 aspirin. And he says, what's this for? And he says, for your headache. And she says, I don't have a headache. And he says, gotcha. And so anyway, some of you guys are going to get that joke after lunch, and or later today. And so anyway, now the key is to understand each other and understand each other's needs, because we're called to love our spouse not the way we want to love them, but the way that they receive love. Number 2, not only are there unfulfilled needs, number 2, there's unresolved conflict. And so the challenge is when there's unresolved conflict, and then people start, a husband or wife will start talking to a member of the opposite sex about their marriage issues. And then that person starts looking very attractive. And so you start sharing details about your life with a member of the opposite sex, and now they start appearing much better than your spouse. Like, why is that? Here's why. Because you aren't married to them. Because if you were married to them, you'd be talking to now a different person about your spouse. Because here's the challenge, right? Most couples are going through similar things. Now, to varying degrees and at different times, but we all have conflict. Every marriage has conflict, and the best solution is not for a wife to talk to some other guy about the problems she has with her husband, or for a husband to talk to some other woman about an issue that he has with his wife, but instead for a husband and a wife to learn to talk to one another and how to resolve the conflict. So, unfulfilled needs, unresolved conflict, and then here's the third one, unmet expectations. Unmet expectations are one of the biggest challenges that marriages face, and here's the reason why, is because most of our expectations are unspoken. That is, we don't verbalize them, but we expect our spouse to know what we want. We expect our spouse to see reality the same way that we do, and when they don't, then there's trouble. And the problem is the focus is all wrong, and we're never going to have a fulfilling and happy marriage if we keep putting unspoken expectations on our spouse. And by the way, some of those expectations are silly, and some of them are serious. And so you're getting married, and you say, well, where are we going to live? And are we going to live close to my parents? Are we going to live close to your parents? I mean, are we going to live on the same planet as your parents? And, how many kids do we want to have? And what's the holiday schedule? And so, maybe what we can do is we'll do Thanksgiving and Christmas and Easter with my parents, right? We'll do that. And then, Memorial Day and Veterans Day and Groundhog Day, throw that bone to your parents, and we'll do that. And so, but we have these expectations. Now, I'll tell you this, and I've shared this before if you've been to one of our marriage retreats, but I'll tell you one of my expectations when my wife and I got married. I thought my wife was going to wear lingerie to sleep every night. That's what I thought was going to happen. Now, maybe I was naive because, listen, my wife and I waited until we got married, and so I have had sex with one person, my wife. I'm very proud of that. Not interested in anybody else. I appreciate that. In the last service, only one person clapped. And that person wasn't my wife. And so, that was a little awkward, I'm going to be honest. And it's just like, hey, lady, you got what you got. And so, anyway, so what happens is that, so I'm thinking my wife is going to wear something, sexy to bed every night. And then, my wife showed up with pajamas. And so I say, like, I'm sorry, is this some kind of joke? And she says, what is? And I'm like, I don't know, this cotton, non-form-fitting situation that you've made? Like, where's your real sleepwear? Like something with like lace or leather, barbed wire? I don't know. And now, okay. Apparently, that's the wrong thing to say to someone with whom you have been married for like 4 days. And I recognize that now. And the other thing that I've learned over the years now is that I've learned that lingerie is not sleepwear. It's really more of activewear. And so I learned that as well. So anyway, now, kids, if you don't understand that, talk to your parents on the way home. It'll be the funnest car ride you ever had. So anyway, so we're going to talk about, like, how does adultery happen? The best way to understand it is to watch the train wreck as it happens. And from one of the greatest men in the Bible, and when you read this, if you've never read this before, it's going to be really eye-opening. If you have, it's a reminder to say, like, how could this happen to the guy who slew giants? To the guy about whom the Psalms that we quote were written by. And once again, it's a reminder that this can happen to anyone. Because listen, we all know that there's a line. And like, even if you're not a Christian, you're not a church person, you're like, hey, that is the line. Adultery is the line. And we don't want to cross the line. But then what happens is sometimes we will get very close to the line. Well, as long as I don't cross the line, I'm good. The problem is, what we're going to see is that David, as we look at the story, David doesn't just kind of fall into adultery. Instead, he starts making these poor decisions that lead him there. And listen, as we watch this, we're going to learn 3 ways to not only affair-proof our marriages, but to ensure that our marriage will finish well. So here's what we start in 2 Samuel 11 in verse 1. It says, "It happened in the spring of the year, at the time when kings go out to battle, that David sent Joab and his servants with him and all Israel, and they destroyed the people of Ammon and besieged Rabbah. But David remained at Jerusalem." If you pause there and give me your attention, there's 3 things we're going to look at. Number 1 is this, if you're a note taker, and that is don't drift towards the line. Now, what I just read to you, that verse, it seems innocuous enough. Everybody's going to battle. David is in Jerusalem. It's the spring. Things are good, right? Seems good. But see, the thing you got to understand is that from ancient times up through, by the way, the founding of America, so countries didn't fight. When there was war, there wasn't war all year long. Instead, they started fighting in the spring. And that would lead through the summer into the early fall when the temperatures would change. And then both parties would stop until the winter months was over, because it was too difficult to not only engage with an enemy when you were fighting the elements as well. Now, fighting was part of the king's job description. In 1 Samuel, when the people were telling Samuel, we want God to give us a king that we might be like the other nations. This is what they say. They say, so that we may be like all the nations, and our king may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles. Now, David is the king, and he's the one that's supposed to lead the troops into battle, but he has decided to stay home. And so there's already a problem. He's not engaged in the things that he's supposed to be engaged in. And this is what causes him to begin to drift. In the book of Hebrews, the writer of Hebrews is talking to a group of Christians that are beginning to waver in their faith. And here's what he says to them: we must pay the most careful attention, lest to what we, therefore, to what we have heard, so that we do not drift away. Because, friends, that's always how sin comes into our lives. It's never loud and overt. It's usually sly, and it usually is trying to get us like 1 degree, 2 degrees, 3 degrees off. And it's like, oh, it still seems like we're doing okay. And then we don't realize after a season of time that we've just drifted so far away. Now, let me ask this question. How many of you had, like, on the first, there's like changes you're going to make, right? Big things you're going to change. Anybody? Changes you're going to make in your life? Okay, 6 people. All right. I'm going to talk to this group that I neglect all the time anyway. All right. How many of you are like, Monday it all starts? How many you got? Okay, very good. Oh, several of you. Okay. Like, I am not starting anything on the first. What madman starts on a Wednesday? Things start on Monday, like the Bible says. And so, all right. So, okay. Now, but here's the thing, if you're starting, right, you're trying to set yourself up to succeed. And so what happens is that if you've ever started like an eating plan or something and then fallen off the wagon, it was never overt. You never woke up in the morning and said, hey, I'm going to eat terrible. Instead, you were basically a victim of circumstance. Something happened and you're like, hey, this isn't my fault. So you got invited to a birthday party, and that birthday party was at the Cheesecake Factory. And you were like, I know, I looked at the menu before I got there, and you're like, I'm not having any dessert, and because I had this salad that was absolute trash. And so anyway, and then, you're like, and I know what I love there. The Linda's fudge cake is what I love. But the Linda's fudge cake is 1,300 calories, and that is a gateway to all the evils that I'm trying to avoid. And so, but, as fate would have it, the person that you're sitting next to, they order the Linda's fudge cake. And so now when it arrives, you turn your chair a little bit away because you're like, I'm not even going to acknowledge that it's there. And so you're having conversation, and you got all kinds of time, and you're still feeling light because you're still hungry because all you had was that trash salad, and so you couldn't even have the bread because carbs are the devil. And so now you're just you're talking, and then somebody says something, and you turn, and then you lock eyes with it, you and Linda, and I didn't realize Linda had so many chocolate chips. All like, wow, that's really generous of Cheesecake Factory. I didn't realize there must be like 100 chocolate chips. And then the more you gaze into its soul, you start seeing now the ganache icing on top, and you're like, wow, that's really something. It's like waves of emotion as it's going, right? And then you see that, wow, that like the cake is so moist. It's so moist, and in between each layer, all that fudge, wow. And then they always bring more than one spoon, right? You ever notice that? But somehow a spoon lands in front of you. And you were like, is that you, Lord? And and then you come out of the trance, and like the cake is gone, and you're just like stuff all over your face. And then you realize, wow, that person wasn't with me. That's the next table. And what did I do? And that didn't happen to me. That's some other guy. That guy's a real loser. And pray for him. And so, but listen, it's not that you were trying to drift. It's that you just weren't doing what we had to do to keep from drifting. And let me tell you something. In marriage, it is exactly the same way. Long before there's infidelity, there's a drifting in the relationship. Because listen, marriage is like any other relationship where what happens is you start out passionate. And you just say, we're getting married. I just don't want to spend 1 minute apart from you. And then you get to a point, and you're like, hey, have you ever thought about taking separate vacations? And I'm telling you, man, I didn't know that was a thing that existed until I was talking to a guy. And he's like, oh, yeah, my wife and I, we do different things for vacation. And I'm like, you did what? And he's like, no, you better stop doing that if you want to continue to have the same address. And so anyway, we'll see how that works out. But what happens is that, and it's just, you don't stay passionate by accident. Passion continues. Listen, if you're not intentional, life moves, and this happens in every area of life. It moves from passion to function. And that's where it always begins. It always starts intentional and passion, that we just go the extra mile without being asked. When my wife and I were engaged, I found out, she called me one morning, when she was living in Tallahassee. She called to tell me that she had pneumonia. And I hung up the phone, and within 20 minutes, I was in my car. I drove 450 miles to get her. I grabbed her a bag, got her in the car, drove another 450 miles home to take her home to her parents' house. That's love, my friends. That's what love does. Now, let's fast forward a year, right? This incredible guy who loves his wife, me. Right? What happens a year into 6 months into his marriage? We're in this little apartment that we have at the time, and we're going to sleep. And she says, Bob, do you mind getting up and getting me a glass of water? You would have thought, if you would have heard me, that she would have been, Bob, would you mind giving me one of your kidneys? You would have thought, because I was like, oh! Like what, like this Herculean task has been asked of me. And so I get up, I get the water, I put it on her nightstand, and I'm laying in bed, and I'm telling you, I had a moment where I said, this is so messed up. Where a little over a year ago, I drove 900 miles for her. And now somehow 9 feet gets me bent out of shape. And I just made this decision. Why? Because something happened. Passion was very quickly turning into function. And I just made an intentional decision that I was going to be the kind of husband that would move heaven and earth for his wife, no matter when it was. And so, and that's really that's my hope for you, that you be 900-mile guy, not 9 feet guy. And because, by the way, temptation is never about just saying no to something. Having victory over temptation is about saying no, but replacing the temptation with something that's healthy. And so David is drifting, and this is what makes him open to temptation. Look what happens in verse 2. It says, it goes on, it says this, then it happened one evening that David arose from his bed and walked on the roof of the king's house. And from the roof he saw a woman bathing, and the woman was very beautiful to behold. And so David sent and inquired about the woman, and someone said, "Is this not Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite?" And if you pause there and give me your attention. Once again, we said don't drift towards the line, and then here's number 2, don't dance on the line. Now, before you think David is some weirdo, it's like, this guy, he's the king. He's like walking on his roof. Like, what kind of a maniac? No, you got to understand that this is very common. All the roofs at that time, even in Israel to this day, so many roofs are flat, so that you could go up on your roof during the evening hours, and it could serve as like your patio. And so the same thing is true for Bathsheba. She's bathing on the roof because it wasn't uncommon for people to do that, and they weren't expecting to be seen. However, in that culture, because the king's house is higher up than everybody else, then he's going to have a different view than most people. But David shows up, and he sees this beautiful woman bathing, and then he asks who this is. And by the way, when he finds out who this is where the conversation should have ended. This is what is told to him. Isn't this Eliam's wife, or Eliam's daughter, Uriah's wife? Now, there's 2 people mentioned, 3 people are implied altogether. So if you're a note taker, you just write this somewhere in your notes. Eliam was one of David's mighty men. David's mighty men were a group of 400 guys that stood by David and believed that he was called to be king. And at great personal cost to them, they stood with David. These were his closest and most loyal men. This Eliam is one of these guys, and this is Eliam's daughter. That should be enough. The second thing is, he says, isn't this Uriah's wife? Uriah the Hittite was one of David's soldiers. Uriah was in Rabbah, the place where David was supposed to be. He was there fighting David's enemies while David is on the roof checking out his wife. I mean, that should have been like, oh man, this is one of my soldiers. I can't get involved in this. And then the third name that's not mentioned is a guy named Ahithophel. Ahithophel is not mentioned, but Ahithophel is David's counselor. He helped David make great decisions throughout the years, give David great wisdom. In 2 Samuel 23, it says, Eliam, the son of Ahithophel, the Gilonite. If Ahithophel is David's father, then that makes Bathsheba Ahithophel's granddaughter. And so this is an absolute no-no. You don't want any part of this. And so, by the way, if you're a Bible student, let me give you a little tidbit, is that if you're reading 2 Samuel, several chapters from now, David has a son named Absalom. Absalom will rebel against David and try to take the kingdom from him. And when he does that, Ahithophel leaves David and joins Absalom. Why? Because of this. Because he saw what David did with his granddaughter as an absolute betrayal of all the years of service that Ahithophel had given him. But see, you and I can look at this, and it's amazing because I think all of us are on the same page. We look at this unemotionally, and we say, this is a no-brainer, don't do it, get out of there. And when you're not involved, you can assess the situation in seconds and say, David, it's not worth it, get out of there. I had this happen a couple of months ago. I was at the post office because I was mailing out I had sold a guitar, and so I was mailing it out. And there's a bunch of people in line and only one person working, which is really, it makes me question why you don't hear about customers going postal. But anyway, that's another story. So, there's one guy that's working behind the counter, taking his sweet time, and he's trying to figure out how much it's going to cost. He's measuring the box and all this stuff. And so then, as I'm up at the front, some guy comes in. And the guy who works at the post office greets him. And he says, hey man, how's your family? Oh, good. How's your new pet? He gives me the air quotes. How's your new pet? Oh yeah, everybody's great. And then the post office guy turns to me and he says, yeah, that guy, he lives on a lake. And his kids go swimming in the lake. And I'm like, okay, the kids have hepatitis, what else? And he's like, no. But in the lake, there's an alligator, and the alligator swims with them. Isn't that great? And I'm like, no, it's terrible. And I'm like, he needs to get his kids out of there. And then the guy says to me, no, it's not like that. The alligator swims around the kids to protect them. And I'm like, no, it is like that. The alligator is protecting them because he's planning on eating them. And this dad needs to get his kids out of there. And then the guy says to me, no, ma'am, you don't get it. And I said, let me tell you something. I'm the only one who gets it. That dad needs to get your kids out of there. And anyway, then they kicked me out of the post office. That's a different story. And so, now, the problem is, it's tough to look at things unemotionally when we're involved in it. But if we don't look at a situation rationally, we're going to make life-altering decisions, which is why we need to make decisions in advance before things get emotional and we get caught up in the moment. I have personal safeguards in my life that to some people may seem extreme, but it's what I've done, and I've done this like since I've been married now, almost 28 years. I won't go out to eat with a woman who isn't my wife or one of my kids or my family. I won't do it. I won't drive in a car alone with a woman who isn't my wife or my family. I won't counsel a woman in church alone. I don't have female friends that I call, just to talk. I don't do that. And is there some verse about that? Thou shalt not drive in thy neighbor's wife in thy chariot. And, right, as far as like who you drive in with your chariot, the Bible's pretty open about that. And there's no verse, but it's just a wise choice because it's too easy for things to happen. And the next thing you know, sin is at your door. My counsel to you is don't dance on the line and think like, no, I can stop just short of the line and everything is okay. No, instead, exercise wisdom and set some safeguards in your life. And I had a few months ago, I'm leaving church one afternoon, and as I walk out to my car, there's a girl in the front lawn of the church wearing a bikini. And she's in the front line, and she says, hey, Pastor Bob, how are you? I'm like, hey, how you doing? And she's like, hey, can you give me a ride? And I'm like, I absolutely cannot give you a ride. And she's like, oh, is it because you're busy? And I'm like, really has nothing to do with the fact that I'm busy. And I don't drive in cars alone with women, especially when one is wearing a two-piece bikini. And by the way, she was super cool about it. Oh, I totally understand if God's given you that conviction. And then we found somebody else to give her a ride, and that all kind of worked out. And not to say it wasn't a little bit awkward, but people ask me though, they're like, is it okay for Christians to wear a two-piece bikini and a two-piece bathing suit? I'm like, personally, I wear one piece, but you got to decide where you land. You got to decide where you. Now listen, nobody sets out to ruin their lives, but sometimes we don't set out not to ruin our lives by making certain decisions on the front end. All right, verse 4, and then we're going to be done. Verse 4 and 5, it says, and then David sent messengers and took her, and she came to him, and he lay with her, for she was cleansed from her impurity, and she returned to her house. And the woman conceived, and so she sent and told David and said, I am with child. Now, if you pause there and give me your attention, last thing, and that is don't get dragged over the line. This is the moment that changes David's life. Up until this moment, things have been difficult for David, but God has been with David, fighting for David, elevating David to the throne of Israel. And unfortunately, David, he doesn't just own it and say, I've made a horrible mistake. Instead, he starts doubling down. He's like, I can fix this. He calls Uriah in from battle. He gets Uriah drunk and says, hey, go home to your wife. But Uriah, because he's so loyal to the men that he serves with, he won't go into his house, and so he sleeps at the front door of his house. Then David hears about it, gets him drunk again, and sends him back. And Uriah won't go into his house to be with his wife, because the hope is, David's thinking, I can get him to be with his wife, and then when she's pregnant, it'll be, oh, it's Uriah's baby. Wow, it's amazing. And so thinking that that's what would kind of fix the situation. But Uriah won't do that because he's a man of integrity. So instead, David sends Uriah back with a note to give to Joab, who's the leader of he's the commander of David's military, and the note says, I want you to put Uriah in the heaviest part of the battle. And when he's there, I want everybody to drop back. And sure enough, Uriah gets killed. Then David feels like, okay, it's okay, and then he marries Bathsheba. Well, then the prophet, about a year later, the prophet comes to see him. And here's what the prophet says in 2 Samuel 12. He says, you have killed Uriah the Hittite with the sword, and you have taken his wife to be your wife. and you have killed him with the sword of the people of Ammon. Now therefore the sword shall never depart from your house, because you have despised me, and you have taken the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be your wife. Now, and some could say, well, you got to understand, David has needs, and he's just doing what's natural. Yeah, that's not going to work. And here's why. Because David has 7 wives and 10 concubines. And so saying that, oh, his wife is unavailable to him, that's not going to work. And by the way, just because the Bible is telling us this doesn't mean that the Bible neither supports nor promotes polygamy. The Bible is simply faithfully reporting what happened. And by the way, if the Bible was okay with polygamy, then David taking Bathsheba, there would be no judgment attached to that. But David's issue was one of desire that was out of control. And he had no safeguards in his life by which to assist him when temptation reared its head. Jesus would say it this way: you've heard it was said to those of old, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that whoever looks at a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. What is Jesus saying? He's saying this: why don't you deal with the heart issues and what causes the action long before you get to the line that you don't want to cross? If you deal with what's happening in your heart, you're going to deal with it way back here, and you're never going to get to the line that you never want to pass. Listen, the relationship that you're looking for isn't with someone else. What you're seeking is for your relationship to be transformed. And for that, we need the power of God. And it's not something that we can do on our own. Because here's what happens. When you're a kid, you believe that everybody lives happily ever after without any effort. And that if 2 people can just get together, then it'll just kind of work out. But that's not the way that love and marriage works. Marriage takes work for it to work out. It takes a commitment where we say we're going to stay together no matter what. And at some point, the Apostle Paul would say this: when I became a man, I put away childish things. And we have to put away the childish idea that there's just like, well, there's a perfect person out there for everyone. No, it's not that there's a perfect person out there for everyone. Instead, a happy, healthy, God-honoring marriage isn't easy. It simply takes 2 people that aren't looking for someone else who's going to make it easier. Instead, they're looking at themselves to see how can they become the people God created them to be. And that they are committed to the person that God brought them. And that they're looking to the person that they married, and here's what they're saying. They're like, it's you and me forever, no matter what. My friends, that kind of love, that is the kind of love that can go the distance and bring you a lifetime of joy. Let's pray together. And Lord, we want to thank you for that. We're grateful for how not only you set safeguards, but how you have, for so many of us, brought us someone. So Lord, I pray that you'd help us. Help us to take the relationship that you've given us, not allow it to be one of function, but instead for us to be intentional and one of passion, where we're doing whatever we can, moving heaven and earth for the person that you've entrusted to us and who's given their heart to us. Lord, I pray for every relationship that's represented in this room, present and future, and that you would be blessing each person here as they make a decision to follow you and obey you. And we pray it in Jesus' name, and everybody said, amen. Amen.
Thank you for joining us today. If you made a decision to follow Jesus and begin a relationship with him, congratulations. It's the best decision you're ever going to make. You may be wondering, so what happens now? Where do I go from here? Just text BEGIN to 62488 and we'll be able to send you this free gift. It's a book called Begin, written by Pastor Bob, and it's going to help you take those first steps on your new journey of faith. So remember, to stay up to date with everything happening at Calvary, follow @MyCalvary on Instagram and Facebook. Until next week, we love you, we're praying for you. God bless you.